mind a person who has a number of years. This person has been in some very powerful positions. They've had building projects. They've had business deals that were done successfully. They've been able to govern a nation and do it successfully, and have been able to extend the borders of that nation. A person who is able to make decisions as a judge would, to hear two sides of a story and make the wise decision as to what should be the outcome. This person is well respected for their wisdom, and people seek this person out to get their thoughts on a wide range of subjects all the time. This person is also a parent, and this parent loves his children, and he only wants the best for them. This parent wants his children to not repeat the mistakes that they've made in life, and to avoid the traps that we find in our way as we walk through this life. This parent realizes that one day he's no longer going to be around to help guide his children. He's not going to be there to help them when they're making tough decisions or even everyday decisions on what is the right thing to do. And he decides to write as many things that he's experienced, as many things that he's learned along the way. He decides to write these things down in a way that his son or sons can look at these things and not repeat the mistakes they've made, and that they can excel in this life. This is an artist rendition of what Solomon may have looked like. We have no real idea of what Solomon might have looked like. But if you look at this man, here he is. He's lived a number of years. He is considered to be a wise person by many thousands of people. He has experienced an awful lot of things. And here he is writing the book of Proverbs, and he has all this paper around, and he's thinking about, or could be thinking about, is there anything else that I need to write to help my children out in this life that may give them an edge that I didn't have when I was their age? God, through the, I was going to say pens, but it's actually more of a quill of Solomon and Agur and Lemuel, did that for us in the book of Proverbs. It is the wisdom, but they had help. It wasn't them. They had help. These are the words of wisdom from God our Father, and it thoroughly equips us to conduct ourselves in this life, in all areas of this life, and we can excel if we get a grasp of what is found in the book of Proverbs. Now, God's idea of excellence is, and what man considers to be excellence, are two different things. Man's idea of excellence is, what kind of car do you drive? What kind of house do you have? What kind of job do you have? Did you get a promotion? Do you have all these trappings of life? God's idea of excellence is, are you following after me? Are you doing things that I consider to be important and not what the world considers to be important? Solomon said that wisdom is better than rubies, and the things one may desire cannot be compared to her. This is in Proverbs 8:11. He also says that the blessings of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow with it in Proverbs 10:22. So man's definition of wisdom and excellence and success are much different from God's definition of success. Let's begin with chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 1 through 7. The Proverbs, this is the New King James Version. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. In these first 7 verses, we have a statement of what many consider as being the motto of this book. It is the purpose of Proverbs. Here he says, remember he's writing to his sons and to us as well by extension. He wants them to gain from what he has learned in this life. Look at the words he uses in this opening. He says he wants to pass on wisdom. Wisdom, we said last week, was using knowledge in the right way. And he also wants them to receive instruction. And instruction here is really defined as discipline or chasten. It is where we get the word disciple from. Prudence is another word. He says prudence to the simple. And prudence is thinking about the future consequences of your actions before taking that action, considering what could happen. The simple here, we think of the simple as being someone who is not very smart. Here, simple is better translated as sinner or rascal. Someone who is not exercising prudence but goes and do things rashly, things that are against God's will. And they don't think about what the consequences are before they continue to do these things. He says to provide the young knowledge, which is, we said knowledge is information, and discretion. And discretion is regarding the feelings of another person or circumstances of another person by what we say and what we do. So if they hear us, we want to make sure that we are being discreet in our communications and our actions as well. Learning is the application of information. And as we know, when you're learning, a lot of times you don't get it right the first time. Learning a lot of times takes practice to be able to get. But because of this practice and failure and then learning, you get insight as to why that is. Sound or wise counsel is from God. We get the counsel from God by studying His Word. And if the listeners or the audience that Solomon is trying to reach here, if they grasp this knowledge, these words that he's written, and take and take full advantage of what he is trying to pass on, then it will be well with them. And above all, he says to make God your most cherished counselor. Seek wisdom from Him at every turn. I should have advanced this and did not. And then he ends the first 7 verses. In verse 7, he says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This is a antithetical parallelism that we talked about last week. The second part of this says that the fools despise wisdom and instruction. And a antithetical is where the first part and the second part are opposite of each other. Threw that in for no extra charge. Again, he closes with this in verse 7, what is considered to be, again, the symbol of the whole book. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fear in this passage is reverence and deep respect and honor towards God. We can't really begin to understand anything about God unless deep respect and honor and glory is our starting point. Let's continue in verses 8 and 9. It's not advancing. Verses 8 and 9 of chapter 1 says, my son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck. Verses 8 and 9, again, is a form of this is a synectic parallelism, where the second part in verse 9 extends the thoughts of the first part in verse 8. In these two verses, we have a plea to young men. Well, not just men, young people in general, to heed the instructions and rules of their parents. And although they may be harsh or seem harsh, they may seem overbearing when you're young, and that they just don't want you to have any fun, like I thought when I was growing up. When you're grown and you realize what these rules and these things that they put in place was for your benefit, once you realize that, and when you realize that when you're grown, these things become more precious to you. He says that they will be like a graceful ornament on your head and chains around your neck. And he's talking about they will be like jewelry, things that of great value that people wear. He's using that illustration. Then he goes on in verses 10 through 17 to talk about avoiding evil companions. And I shorten this a little bit for the sake of time. He says, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. My son, do not walk with them. Do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. But they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are all the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners. Here he is urging his children to stay away from evil companions. Be careful who you pick as friends. Friends can either help you become a better person, or they can make you, drag you down to a level that you never thought you would sink to. Here he's talking about friends that are going to drag you down and cause you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. Thank you. So he says to be careful about these people that you hang around with. Now, this isn't just remember, Solomon is a king. His sons are princes, and they hang around with very influential people all the time. But a bad person may be a person who is poor or a person who is rich. It doesn't matter. Bad people come in all shapes and sizes, all kinds of economic means. And so he says, be careful the people that you hang around with, because it can be bad for you. It can even take your life in the end if you hang around with these guys. So he says, stay away from these evil companions. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 33 says, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. Then down in verses 20 through 33, I'm going to read that because it's a pretty long passage, but it paints a picture of wisdom as a woman. I couldn't find a picture of this, but it really is a kind of a striking image. Is a person who is out in the square in town. They are crying aloud, and there are people all around. Some people are just going by, paying this person who is wisdom, being painted as a woman, crying aloud in the square. They're going by, paying her no attention. Whereas you have some who stop and look and make fun of her. Others that stop and actually mock her or condemn her. But nobody, or a very few people, actually listen to what she says. Solomon is saying that wisdom isn't something that's hidden that you can't find. Wisdom is all around us. And we need to see it for what it is and understand from that. If you go back to Romans chapter 1, where the Gentiles are being condemned by Paul, because he's basically saying, you know, there were things in nature that you should have seen to realize that who God was. There were things there, but you chose not to pay attention to it. You didn't look. Wisdom is all around us, and we need to see it for what it is. It's not something that you can't find. He shows it as being, you know, it's out in the streets, and it's loud, and we should listen rather than ignoring this message of wisdom. He says that the wisdom from God is readily available to us today. Actually, it's more accessible to us today than it was to the people in the days of Solomon. Our houses probably have half a dozen or more Bibles, as do many houses in America. But a lot of times people don't bother or take the time to actually open that Bible up and start looking at it and reading and studying from it. The wisdom is there. They just need to go and find it. Hosea 4 and 6 says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge." We should be careful that this doesn't happen to us. The final verses of chapter 1 transitions very well into the beginning of chapter 2. Chapter 1, where he's talking about wisdom crying out in the streets, it's a dire warning of the consequences of rejecting wisdom. And he talks about that at the end of chapter 1. And it begins another plea to hear this message, and good things will follow. In chapter 2, he gives the fruits of wisdom. And the first of these fruits is that the seeker, the one who looks, will find God. In Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, he says, "If you receive my words and treasure my commands within you, so that you incline your ear to wisdom and apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you cry out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding. If you seek her as silver and search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and will find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. And he stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk uprightly. He guards the path of justice and preserves the way of his saints." Interesting point here in the very first word where he uses the word saints. Mr. Kaufman said that is the only place in the Old Testament where that word saints is used. Thought that was an interesting observation. Anyway, Solomon here addresses this to his son and by extension to us, to take these words in Proverbs to heart, to think of them as precious, to study and meditate on them. If you do that, then you will find God. You will understand the fear of the Lord. And when that is your starting point, you will find wisdom from God that will guide and protect you as you navigate through this life. The second fruit of wisdom is you will find the precious rewards of wisdom. In chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, it says, "Then you will understand righteousness and justice, equity, and every good path. When wisdom enters your heart and knowledge is pleasant to your soul, discretion will preserve you. Understanding will keep you." When we find, understand, and apply the wisdom from God, precious rewards are also found. Solomon's son Rehoboam would one day rule Israel after Solomon passed on. And he would sorely need to understand righteousness and justice and equity. Unfortunately, as we read in 2 Kings, and we find that Rehoboam, when he became king, sought bad counsel. And one of his first acts as king caused the kingdom to split, because he didn't exercise righteousness or justice or equity for these 10 northern tribes. But you don't need to be a king to be a leader or be a leader. You can benefit from the wisdom of God and extend justice and equity to everyone you come in contact with. And you will find that you have better relations with those round about you by doing this. In chapter 2, verses 12 through 15, we find the third of these fruits. 12 through 15. He says, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things, from those who lead the paths of righteousness, of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil, and delight in the perversity of the wicked, whose ways are crooked, and who are devious in their paths. Wisdom from God will help us see the benefit of abstaining from evil things and staying away from evil people. I think sin is so hard to stay away from because most of the time it appeals to our senses. I think there's three categories of that sin fall into. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. And those three things in that combination, whether it's one of those things or all three of those things, really has this effect on us that we have to be careful that we stay away from that because it is so easy. You know, if sin was ugly or painful or distasteful, we would likely find it pretty easy to stay away from, but it's not. So we must be on our guard to see sin for what it is and to avoid it. All of us can probably think of people whose lives were ruined or even lost because they refused to stay away from evil people or evil situations. Rich people, poor people, powerful people, powerless people. Evil invites everyone. And if you choose to partake of this, it could also cost you everything, even your life. Wisdom from God equips us to recognize what is good and what is bad in God's eyes so that we can stay away from those people and those circumstances that may compromise our integrity. So it delivers us from evil. Closely akin to evil companions is the effects of an immoral woman. In verses 16 through 19, Solomon continues, to deliver you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words, who forsakes the companion of her youth, and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house leads down to death, and her paths to the dead. None who go up to her return, nor do they regain the paths of life. Again, closely related to evil companions is this immoral woman. Now, this verse could just as well have been written about an immoral man, because there are plenty of immoral men out there as well. The seduction by use of words that appeal to one's ego, words that cause one to forget all about the commitment we made to God or to our family. And we are led down, willingly led down these paths of destruction. Once a person succumbs to this, they can never return to their previous state. They can repent and never do that again. But there is a constant reminder of their falling. Many of us know of people who travel down this road and reap the consequences that will last a lifetime. Wisdom from God helps us to avoid this trap and delivers us from this situation. but there's a silver lining. In verses 20 through 22, it says, "So you may walk in the way of goodness and keep the path of righteousness. For the upright will dwell in the land, and the blameless will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the earth, and the unfaithful will be uprooted from it." The fifth fruit of wisdom helps us to steer clear of all these potential traps that are laid by evil people and the allure of bad behavior. We do so by focusing on the reward at the end of the road. In so doing, we receive this special, this promised inheritance. Now, in the days of Solomon, when he talked about this, they were probably thinking of this inheritance as land and inheritance as being the land of Canaan, Israel. That was this land that God had promised to them and had given to them. To Christians, our promised land is even sweeter and of more value. Our promised land is heaven itself, to be in the presence of God and Jesus Christ forever. If we focus on the prize that lies ahead, it helps us to keep our present difficulties in their proper perspective. Let's move into chapter 3. Chapter 3 is broken into three parts. The first, in verses 1 through 10, is a call to complete commitment. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. He says, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace will add to you. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the firstfruits of all your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine." Some scholars argue that verses 1 through 10 are not referring to the law of Moses. I think that's a hard position to try to justify, given the similarity of the language that's used. I'll let you decide on your own. Here Solomon is driving home the point that truly serving God is a lifetime commitment, not something you do ever so often. God has to be the center of our lives and not just a part of our lives, along with a lot of other things. We need to be diligent to do His will and do it to the best of our ability every day. By doing so, we will receive God's favor and be held in high esteem by other people, but also by God. Solomon reminds his son to allow God to direct his paths and not to rely, as we often do, we rely on our own abilities and our own senses to show us the way rather than allowing God to guide our paths. He also says, don't think of yourself, don't think more of yourself than you really are. And that's a hard one for most people, me included. You like to think you're special, and you like to think that that we all probably have a high esteem of ourselves and our abilities and who we think we are. He says, be careful with that, because you could make yourself out to be something you're really not. Be humble. He also says to use your possessions to honor God. By doing so, we will receive God's favor. We will receive God's favor. And he says, give God the first fruits, not just the leftovers. And he says, if you do this, you will never go wanting in life. The second part of chapter 3 is the happiness and blessings of those who trust in the Lord. In verses 11 through 20, Solomon says, my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as the Father, the Son in whom he delights. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, and the man who gains understanding. For her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare to her. Length of days is in her right hand, in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens, and by his knowledge the depths were broken up, and clouds drop down the dew. Getting corrected or getting punished as a young man, and I did often for good reason. It's not much fun. Having to change and not do things that you like doing can be frustrating. But correction is not meant to hurt us, but to save us by supplying us with wisdom. Learn to focus on the results and not on the temporary unpleasantness of the correction. To us, wisdom should be held as precious, more valuable than gold or jewels. Remember who God is. He founded the earth. He established the heavens. He separated the land and the seas. The clouds that send the rain, or the clouds send the rain at his command. He is far greater than us, and his wisdom is far greater than the wisdom from man. Now, the final division of chapter 3 relates to the confidence and security of those who walk with God. While the second division gave us images of heaven, this section brings us back down to earth. It provides us with, again, the confidence and security that wisdom provides. In verses 21 through 34, Solomon writes, my son, let them not depart from your eyes. He's talking about wisdom. Let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, for they will be life to your soul and grace to your neck. Then you will walk safely in your way, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of troubles from the wicked when it comes. For the Lord will be your confidence, and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due. When it is in the power of when it is in the power of your hand to do so. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back, and tomorrow I will give it. when you have it with you. Do not devise evil against your neighbor, for he dwells by you for safety's sake. Do not strive with a man without cause, if he has done you no harm. Do not envy the oppressor, and choose none of his ways. For the perverse person is an abomination to the Lord, but his secret counsel is with the upright. The curse of the Lord is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the just. Surely he scorns the scornful, but gives grace to the humble. The wise will inherit glory, but the shame shall be the legacy of fools. Solomon provides a stern warning in verse 21 that wisdom and discretion can be lost if you are negligent. They must be maintained with constant study. And if you are successful, you don't need to worry when you travel, when you sleep, and when you hear troubling news. God has your back, and you will be safe. Be careful not to emulate those who take advantage of the weak and the helpless, for they are cursed by God. Be humble, and you will receive grace and inherit glory. Thank you so much. Next week, chapters 4, 5, and 6. Thank you so much for your attention.